Hi, I'm Jordan Standridge, and I work in the marketing department at Charlesbridge. This is a case study, a series where we chat with Kidlit creators about the Kidlit in their bookcase. Our guest today is Rebecca Caprara. She is the middle grade author of The Magic of Melwick Orchard, which was a 2019 Massachusetts Book Award must-read, Mission Multiverse, and her latest, WORST-CASE COLLIN. She lives in Massachusetts with her family. Welcome, Rebecca.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for joining us today. Was there a particular book that had a big impact on you as a young reader and writer?
Definitely. I mean, there's probably too many to mention, but there one in particular that came to mind when I saw this question, and it's by Mark Brown. Now, when I was in first grade, I grew up in Massachusetts. When I was in first grade, Mark, who also, I believe, lives in Massachusetts, he came to our school for an author visit. And this was the first time I'd ever met a real live author illustrator. And I was a fan of his books before this. The Arthur series was a favorite. And my parents had bought me this book before my little brother arrived. And so I had a copy of this. And so we all crowded into the, I think it was the auditorium, which doubled as our cafeteria. And we listened to Mark speak about writing and illustrating children's books. And that was so exciting to me because until then, I was only in first grade. I didn't really realized that writing and creating books for kids could be a job. And so that was something that kind of planted a seed in my mind that, of course, took many, many years to come to fruition, this sort of dream of being an author. But I credit him with opening my mind to that possibility. I have one other book that my dad used to read to me every night. We'd read like chapters when I got a bit older. And that was the Borrowers series by Mary Norton. And this is an old copy. This was mine when I was a kid. And I just love these books. I love the idea of these little strange people living in the walls. And, whenever anything went missing in the house, I would blame it on the borrowers, and my parents were like, they're not real, you lost it. And I was like, no, the borrowers took it. It wasn't me. So that was another fun one from my childhood.
That's cool that you were able to have that moment too, when, an author comes to your school, and I'm sure authors enjoy hearing stuff like that too.
Absolutely. And I think a lot about that now. I mean, COVID has kind of put a hold on school visits, but before everything sort of shut down, I loved doing school visits, in classrooms or in auditoriums or, in libraries and getting to meet with kids and, maybe being that first interaction with an author for them as well. And just thinking maybe I'm sitting in an auditorium full of future author illustrators and helping them kind of imagine that possibility for themselves. Is pretty neat. I mean, the end goal is always to connect with readers and to have, kids come up to you and share their ideas or their impressions of the story, and they're so inquisitive and they're so bright. And I always love the things that stand out to them. When you're writing, you kind of write in this bubble, right? Just by yourself. And then to see the way that a story is received or interpreted is so neat, especially coming from students, from kids.
Question 2, your new book with Charlesbridge is written in verse. Do you have a favorite novel in verse?
This is hard because I have so many that I love. I have a bunch up here. I have a whole other shelf. It's one of my favorite storytelling formats. There are 2 books in particular that I feel like were formative in my verse journey, I guess I'll call it. One was The Crossover by Kwame Alexander, which has a shiny award, which was well deserved. So I am a member of the Society of Children's Book Writers and Illustrators, SCBWI, and I was at one of their spring conferences years ago. And I heard Kwame give the keynote address. And I'd heard about The Crossover prior to hearing him speak, but I hadn't really been compelled to pick it up. It was a book about basketball written in poems. And at the time, that pitch just didn't hook me. But then I heard him speak. And, Kwame is just so charismatic. And he brought so much passion, so when he spoke about poetry and its potential for connecting with kids, especially middle grade readers. And so after I heard him, I kind of ran down to the bookshop and picked up a copy of this and just tore through it. And it just, the rhythm of it and the amount of emotion and that he was able to pack into this story with such an economy of words just really opened my eyes to this other storytelling, format, and inspired me to kind of experiment with verse myself. So that definitely was an important book. Another one that I love, and you can tell it's a well-loved copy.
Wow.
And notes in the margins. And I find when I read verse, I often read a verse novel really quickly. I mean, it's a low word count typically. There's tons of white space on the page, and I just kind of tear through it, and that's like the first read. And then almost always, especially if I like the book, I'll go back and read it other times with different eyes, right? I'm looking for different things. I'll go and reread a certain poem over and over again and almost dissect it and try to figure out, like, how did the author do this? Like, how can I learn from this, and how can I, take this into my own writing? So Tang Lies, Inside Out and Back Again is a verse novel that I really just love so much. And it's powerful. And again, just such an economy of word, a sparseness of words. And it just, you feel so much and you wonder, how did she get so much story into so few words and few pages? But it's really beautiful. So this is another one that really continues to inspire me.
You run a book club for middle grade readers at a local indie bookstore. What were some of the books that the club enjoyed the most?
Yeah, so this is something I've been doing for about 2 years now at the Silver Unicorn Bookstore in Acton, Mass., which is not far from where I live. It's a wonderful local indie. It's actually where I'll be launching Worst-Case Colliin, my forthcoming book with Charlesbridge pretty soon. So we've been meeting. We meet once a month. We have kind of a small loyal group, and then it's open to anyone. So some months we have, 10, 12 kids come. Sometimes we have fewer. It totally depends. It's very low pressure. It's all about celebrating the love of, literature. And also most of the kids are creative writers themselves. I've come to learn. So we almost always close out our monthly meetings with some creative writing prompts inspired by our selections. And each month I let the kids vote on the choices because I want them to feel that kind of sense of ownership and just be really excited about our monthly selections. So usually I'll have a short list and they vote. And I will say without a doubt, the most popular choices every month, when we choose them, are graphic novels. These are two, everybody really loved The New Kid by Jerry Craft. And everyone really enjoyed When Stars Are Scattered by Victoria Jameson and Omar Mohammed. There's a lot of debate about the value of graphic novels, I feel like. And I'm strongly on team graphic novel because I've witnessed firsthand the way that kids come to these stories with such enthusiasm. We have our biggest groups whenever we read graphic novels, which I think is really telling. And the discussions that they inspire are so rich. The other thing I love about when we choose graphic novels in book club is that we have discussions about the text, right? We're talking about what the words say, what the dialogue bubbles say, but then we also have this whole other conversation about what the visuals are telling us. So there's these layers of storytelling that kind of make the brain just spark. It's so dynamic. It's like picture books. I feel like picture books and even verse novels to a certain extent with the white space on a page, they are telling a visual and a textual story, which is just really fascinating. So this one, the kids and I really enjoyed. We had some meaningful conversation about. And then another one recently that was a lot of fun was Picasso by Remy Lai. This is also a graphic novel about a dog named Picasso. And what was very cool, I guess one of the silver linings of the kind of COVID virtual world that we've been living in is that I posted that we were reading this book for book club, and Remy, the author, reached out online and asked if we'd like her to join our meeting.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, that was so neat. And she lives in Australia and we're in Massachusetts. So she Zoomed with us. She said from the future, the following morning, 6 a.m., we meet at 6 p.m. And, surprising the kids with the author visit, or even if it's a virtual author visit, they just lost their minds. They were so excited. And they got to ask Remy all kinds of questions. She took them behind the scenes, described how, you draw a graphic novel, how you color it, how does it get published, what are the challenges, which, that kind of insight is so valuable. And probably the highlight of the virtual visit with Remy was that she introduced us to the actual dog behind that inspired this one, which his name is Poop Roller. And he found it hilarious that I said the word poop about 100 times during book club. So that was amusing for all involved. But if it gets them reading, excited about books, then, I'm willing to have some potty talk for the sake of the book.
That's so rad. Like, so the kids in the club didn't even know that the author illustrator of the graphic novel that they read was going to be there either?
Well, I had told their parents.
Okay.
I had emailed the parent group beforehand, and sometimes I let them know if I'm certain an author will come. But this one, we weren't 100% sure that the visit was going to work out, so I didn't want to get everybody hyped for it and then have it not work out just between time zones and everything going on. But it did work out, so it was a really wonderful surprise. And we've now done that a couple times in book club, inviting the author to meet us virtually. And sometimes actually in person. We did have a local author come in. So that's fun because it's a small enough group where we can have this really intimate conversation with the book creator, and the kids leave so inspired, as do I.
I'm sure that was a really neat experience.
Yeah. And now, whenever they see those books on the shelf, they can, I think they'll always have that connection, be like, I met that author, whether it's or not, right? They feel that connection, or they can tell their friends, oh, on this page, this is what really inspired it, or this is, what happened behind the scenes. So they have that insider knowledge, which is pretty cool.
Is there a book that you've purchased multiple times? Maybe one that needs to be shared, possibly as a gift?
Sure. I generally, I try to always support my friends that are authors and gift their books and keep their books. There's a few picture books, when you're invited to baby showers, or, I have young children, so a lot of birthday parties for friends, and I like to give books. One that my children and I love, and that I often gift, is Creepy Carrots. This is such a fun story by Aaron Reynolds, illustrated by Peter Brown. And it has sort of this film noir kind of like vibe. It's black and white, and there's just a little like pops of color in the orange, and it has this cinematic kind of spooky quality to it. And I love the twist ending. I'm not going to spoil it here, but I often think, just from a craft point of view as an author, I'm like, oh, that's so clever. How do you twist something right at that last minute? I mean, some authors call it the wink to the reader, right at the very end, where the book or the villain is not who you thought it was. And I love that. And this book does that so well. And it's not too creepy. I think kids like to be scared, but not too scared. It's perfect for that. So that one's always a hit. Another one that my children would vote for is The Book with No Pictures. When we do like school read alouds, they'll often ask me to do this one because they like to embarrass me or their grandparents. They punk their grandparents into reading this one all the time because it makes grown-ups say goofy things like badungi face, and they think that's hilarious. So that's also a hit. And then the last one that I love for kids and adults alike, it is a picture book. It's kind of a novelty book. It's Barney Salzberg's Beautiful Oops, and it's it has all these cool flaps and little lift up things, and it's kind of an interactive book, but it's all about the way that we can take what we think are oopses, mistakes, and turn them into something beautiful. And I do writing workshops sometimes with adults about writing with resilience. And I think being able to withstand and embrace all the mistakes that we make as authors, as creators, and look for ways to mine those mistakes for possibility is powerful. And so I think it has a really nice message, and for all ages, just about kind of being resilient and looking for those creative opportunities.
Being big fans of Creepy Carrots, have you read Creepy Pair of Underwear?
I have, and I have pictured that. That's like a nice combo to give. Another thing kids love adults to say is the word underpants, apparently.
So you have a 6-year-old and an 8-year-old at home. Do you have a favorite family read aloud?
Yeah, books are definitely a really big part of our life at home. I mean, I think growing up with an author, it's inevitable, but it was such a rich part of my childhood. It's something that's important for us. One series that my daughters really enjoy is the Dory Phantasmagoria series by Abby Hanlon, and it's a nice mix of text and illustration. It's not a graphic novel, but there are some spot illustrations, which are drawn really whimsically. And, Dory is she's just a nut. She's just got this wild imagination, and she's silly. And a lot of the jokes from this story have kind of like seeped into our own world. Dory calls her fairy godmother on any banana. She can call him on any banana. So whenever we, on our shopping list, we put like telephones, and that means actually buy bananas, and it's just like crossed from the imaginary into our real life, which is fun to see. And I just love to hear them like squealing with laughter when Dory does something naughty. They love to see when she's being kind of naughty, and just how she gets herself out of the trouble that she inevitably gets into. So that's a fun one. Another one I think I see behind you as well. I only have a few of them here now, but they love the Elephant and Piggy series as well. So those are also fan favorites in our house. And it's nice because my older daughter is reading a lot. She's kind of really blossomed into a reader and is into chapter books and starting to read middle grade. My younger one is just beginning kind of the excitement of learning to read. And these are great because the story, the pictures tell a lot of the story, but it's also great for beginner readers.
Next question: Do you have any rare or unusual copies in your collection?
Sure. I have a couple. This is kind of a fun thing to think about. I have quite a few. Actually, I know you're a first edition aficionado from your time working as a bookseller. I have some first edition Dare Wright books.
Oh.
I know this series. I know the Edith series or the Lost Doll is a little bit of a problematic book series in some ways, but it's interesting. I like the photography. These belong to my mother when she was a little girl, and they were mine, and now they belong to my daughters. So I love that kind of like multi-generational book. There's certain family heirlooms that maybe you pass down, like a piece of jewelry or a painting, but I love the idea of these books, these first edition books, becoming those family heirlooms and this sort of history of storytelling that gets passed down, which is neat. Another one that I have, so my husband is Italian, and pre-pandemic, we used to spend most of the summer in Italy visiting his family. And one of the things we always did, like my father-in-law's village is quite small, but in the town nearby, there's a little bookshop. So we would go before, at the end of our trip, and we'd kind of like fill up a little suitcase with books in Italian and bring them back home so that we could, read to the children and kind of keep the language alive, and just a nice connection to this other place and this other language. So we have quite a few picture books in Italian. This is called La Cosa Più Importante, which means the most important thing. We also, I have a whole bunch of these tiny little board books from when the kids were little, which are fun just to learn the vocabulary. And for me, as a non-native speaker who's continuing to learn the language, sometimes I can study from these and build my own vocabulary as I work towards fluency. But that's kind of neat and unusual, I guess, on our bookshelf, is to have some stories in other languages.
Last question. For what book have you happily waited in line for in order to get a signed, personalized copy and meet the author?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I have a book that I really regret not waiting in line for, like really regret picking myself. And that is The Poet X. So when Elizabeth Acevedo came, she was on her book tour when this book first came out. She came to the Brookline Booksmith, and my husband and I went to see her. And if you've never seen her perform her poetry, I highly, highly recommend it. She is just magnetic and just, it's hard to describe. She's a slam poet, her background. And so there's just this force when she performs her work. And we were all mesmerized. And of course, after the event, picked up a copy of the book. And unfortunately, we had dinner reservations that night. And so I didn't wait in line, which was many, many people long. Understandably, everybody wanted to speak with Elizabeth and get their book signed. So I did not stick around to get this signed. And of course, this went on to win every award known to man. This is a first edition copy. And I just think, oh, what could have been? And now I learned my lesson. So now I stick around. I don't have to make that mistake twice. That time we could have waited. But regardless, it's a fantastic book. And it was such a privilege to see her in person reading her work. I think she reads her audiobooks too, which I haven't listened to, but I would be interested in.
Our next segment is our Indie and Library Spotlight, an opportunity for our guests to give a shout out to their favorite indie or library, somewhere that you frequent often, support, discovered some of these books in your bookcase. So is there any place in particular that you would like to highlight today?
Sure. I have to give a shout out to my local indie, the Silver Unicorn bookstore. That's right in Acton, Mass. That's where I'm having the launch for Worst-Case Colin. It's also where I run the middle grade book club. So they're basically like family at this point. They are small but mighty, and they're so supportive of local authors and authors from afar as well. But it's really wonderful the way that they've built this sense of community centered around books. And yeah, I'm just so grateful for their support. There's so many wonderful, indie bookstores in the Boston area. Porter Square Books hosted the launch for my first book, which I'll always be grateful for. That was kind of the kickoff for it all. And then my local library. I'm in a tiny town called Boxborough, and I'm constantly requesting all sorts of weird books for all my research for different things. And recently, I'm writing a book that involves dirt bikes and motorcycles, and literally like every handbook for how to tune up a motorcycle they've been getting to me, and the librarian was like, "Are these for you?" And I was like, "Yeah, I might not look like it, but this is a side passion." And they're just and they can make suggestions, and they're also very patient when I have books that are overdue, which is more often than not. So I want to give them all a shout out and just express my gratitude.
Finally, please share with us Worst Case Colin.
Sure. So you can see I got I'm reversed the poster over here, and you have a copy as well. Worst Case Colin is my latest novel. It's a contemporary middle grade novel in verse, which means it's told in connected poems. It is the story of a 12-year-old boy named Colin who is fixated on preparing for every worst case scenario possible, everything from avalanche to riptide. And the reason for this is because a few years prior, Colin lost his mom in a fluke accident. And he can't help but wonder what would have happened differently had someone been better prepared. And so he takes it upon himself to memorize all of these chapters in this worst case scenario handbook so that he's ready. Meanwhile, his father copes with their loss in a very different way. He's a gifted mathematician, but he also struggles with compulsive hoarding disorder, which begins to spiral out of control. And so Colin comes to realize that he's sort of living this worst case scenario, but his home life and also his school life, those situations don't necessarily come with an easy escape plan. And so he has to figure out a way to kind of navigate these challenges and not just survive, but to thrive. And he also kind of comes to learn that sometimes the bravest thing that you can do is to reach out for help. So it's a story about friendship. It's a story about resilience. It's a story about anxiety and mental health issues. It's a story about the people and things we hold on to and learning how to let go. And it's really close to my heart. It's a story I loved. I loved working with the team at Charlesbridge on this particular book. Like I said, it's told through poems. So it's in free verse, but there are also a lot of concrete poems, which was fun to experiment with. And I hope readers enjoy it. I'm excited for it to get out in the world.
I really enjoyed the relationships between Colin and his friends and his dad. There was a moment that stuck out to me that was where Colin is waiting at school because he doesn't feel like he has a place that he can go afterwards.
Right. Yeah.
It was, I thought it was interesting to have those moments, that those quiet moments where, you in other books and other stories, that part isn't written in.
Yeah, I think that's so interesting you picked up on that. I think that's one of the things that a verse novel really allows you to explore. They often say that verse lends itself to kind of quote unquote heavier subject matters. And I think that's true to a certain extent because the white space on the page gives the reader a moment to kind of contemplate what's not said maybe. And that kind of emotional resonance is there in the white space. I think also for me, this story had to be told in verse because Colin, one of the things he's longing for in his kind of cluttered, claustrophobic life is breathing room. And I think the white space on the page of a verse novel reinforces that and allows the reader that breathing room that Colin is so desperately searching for. And so that was a place where kind of the narrative and the form, I could play with that. And readers will pick up on it in different ways. Even when you're working with concrete poems, which are poems that kind of take a shape, it's like sculpting with words. And I was, my editor, Julie Bliven, was so supportive of kind of pushing those boundaries and thinking about, what you say with the words, what you say with the way the words appear on the page, what you don't say sometimes is just as powerful as what you are saying. Yeah. So just really playing with that and experimenting and, and giving the kids the benefit of the doubt. They can connect these disparate things in different ways.
That is a wrap of this episode of Case Study. Thank you so much for joining us today, Rebecca.
Thank you for having me. This was so fun.
It was. And thank you to my colleagues for helping behind the scenes. And thank you to the viewers and listeners for tuning in. So we'll see you next time around. Thank you.